think there's a lot of things we should do down here that would make us more human. And I suspect that we are sufficiently slothful not to do many of them. And we may still survive. We'll survive with qualifications. I think the nearest to the pain of purgatory will be experienced by those of us who are slothful and who have to do up there some corrective things which we should have done down here. And let's reason by analogy. When a baby is born into the world, it is assumed that it has absolutely no control over its plumbing. And we provide dieties and all that sort of thing. But it's also assumed that that child, at a reasonably early age, will get a valve built in there, so that they are able to control this plumbing equipment. As long as that happens, nobody thinks anything of it. There's a period where bedwetting is expected and normal and perfectly natural. It's childlike. I have a friend of mine who has a son who went to college, and he carried this habit into the fraternity house. And can you imagine his mortification? Now, I think many of us are going to wind up on the first mansion world and others as spiritual bedwetters. And I think our humiliation will be even deeper there than the social humiliation of my friend's son. As I started to say, when I said the book does teach that if survival is attained, all other losses can be retrieved, and I don't want to be interrupted until I've explained what that means to me. Jesus lived and taught in a way that illuminates that. He didn't ask the same of everyone. And that's why I refuse to sit in judgment on anyone, because I don't really know the gut of that person. He sent the Alpheus twins back to their nets and promised them they were going to survive. He made it pretty tough for Simon Peter. In fact, he put Simon Peter through a pretty horrible experience to vaccinate him, because Peter's vacillating tendency was fatal to the future. He put Peter through great pain. And then he got Peter a little mad. And he said, "Peter, be a good shepherd, feed my sheep." He pointed out that of the teacher more is expected than of the pupil, of the master more than of the servant. Jesus taught two levels of ethics, two distinct levels of ethics. To the believer, he said, love your neighbor as yourself. To those who would attempt to represent him in the world, he said, you must love men as I have loved men, and these are your credentials. He didn't expect all men to love with father-like affection. He's willing to settle for fraternal affection. That's the minimum ethic. The maximum ethic is fatherlike. I think any human being who is failing to try to live up to his capacities is gambling with non-survival. This is my personal opinion. I don't think any human being has to achieve his capacities, because it said Abraham believed faintly, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. And maybe that's as much as old Abe could do right then. But I can only tell you how I feel. I don't sit in judgment on you folks. If I fail to try to do my best, I'm not so sure I'm going to make it. I don't believe I can sit on my dead duck and count on God's love to pull me through. That is not a childlike faith. That is childish presumption.
You think time?
You evidently want me to preach at you a little bit, so I'll give you a little preaching.
But the time enter in there too? I mean, I'm still thinking of Betty's funny little talk.
That's up to Betty.
I mean, but you think time's important.
Oh, time's is vital to everything this side of paradise, yes. Yes, it's later than any of us think.
It's an evidence of sincerity.
Yes. No. Just remember, you cannot sit in judgment on the sincerity of another human being. This is folly, as well as darn near sinful. There's only one person I can sit in judgment on. That's Bill Sadler. And you'd be amazed if you knew how harsh a judgment that was. You know? That's up to each one of you folks. You got to roll your own hoop, and there is no magic formula, except of the teacher more is expected than of the pupil. The parable of the 5 talents is a good example. And at a certain point, Jesus said to Judas, Judas, that which you have in mind to do, go now and do quickly. Jesus rejected Judas. But again, the fact that the 12 apostles at the very beginning of the Last Supper succeeded in making 12 perfect asses out of themselves, I don't think prejudiced their chances for survival. And the degree of their asininity of conduct was pretty quickly revealed when Jesus got down and washed their feet. These are human beings. He loved them. And in spite of all that they'd been through with him, they could still resent. They could still want preferment. They were still human and a bit too mammalian.
No, they weren't.
They were pretty mammal-like in that arguing about who gets the seat of honor.
Well, that makes it.
Yeah, sure. That's what I'm talking about. And Peter pouting in the very bottom seat, you know, hoping Jesus would ask him to come up higher. Jesus said, let him sit where he's sitting, that's all. And in view of what happened later, it was convenient to have Judas as a next door neighbor. He could whisper to him. It says that the human soul becomes divine not by what it does, but by what it tries to do. If you die insincere, but trying to be sincere, like Abraham's faith, I fancy it's counted unto you for righteousness. Now, I think most people strike themselves out. And I don't think they strike themselves out by being vicious or mean, simply by being typical mammals and lazy. And mammals don't survive. You see, the reason it's so impossible to compute percentages on survival is because this is such a totally individual proposition. And that's why Jesus made the paradoxical statement which he made. Peter had been talking about the straight and narrow way. You remember?
Yeah.
And the broad path that leadeth unto destruction, the old primrose freeway. And Jesus commented on Peter's teaching, and he said it's not without merit. And then he said, the path to the doorway to survival is indeed a narrow one. But he said it's also wide enough to accommodate anyone who really wants to make it, because I am that door.
And then that's the significant part.
You see, I think for the little guy, the doorway is big. And for the big guy, the doorway is small.
Yeah.
I don't feel discouraged about this survival business, but I sure don't feel smug. I feel thoroughly challenged. That's my feeling. Because I think the price of my survival is going to be to jump across that parallel bar just about as high as I can jump. They're not going to set the bar low for me, I don't believe. This much intellectual conceit I have. I'm afraid the bar is going to be pretty high for me. I'm running extremely challenged, not scared, but very challenged. That's my reaction.
Okay, man.
And if somebody else feels very comfortable and secure in the love of God, by gollies, I'm not so sure that won't work for them. It won't work for me. You know what I'm glad of?
What?
I'm glad that they've got some very wonderful beings that decide such cases, that can look inside a person's heart.
The anti-black machine.
Yes, I'm glad that the thought adjuster gives testimony.
Loaded. Yeah.
I'm glad that everybody, that they can be really sure. And always remember they say, in case of doubt, we always advance the creature. But I'm going to try not to use my grace period of 30 days on survival. You superimpose on a real mammalian critter, a spark of infinity. I don't think anyone this side of God would have the courage to do that. The indwelling of the adjuster, to me, testifies to God's originality and to God's amazing courage. Stop and think. We are the farthest out. We are the lowest on the totem pole. There is nothing below us which can know God. And yet he's given us a part of himself, something which I would expect him to do to folks that were way up topside. And yet he doesn't indwell them. He doesn't even indwell our near of kin unless they've done time, so to speak. The atoms usually have to serve on a world. The secondary midwives wait a long time to get this. And yet it's our birthright. Isn't that amazing? We who are the very lowest should have the closest spiritual relationship to God, something which even a Lananandek son does not have. He's not indwelt with the universal Father. Solitary messenger, speaking of adjuster, says, no one but wouldn't delight to be host to a thought adjuster. This thing is hard to understand. It's hard for me to understand how Jesus got here. But the author of the paper dealing with the world of the Father says, the evolution of the immortal soul, its fusion with the adjuster, and the making of these two antipodal creatures, one being, is a great mystery to us. Now, he said, obviously, it's not a mystery to you, because all ascending is open to you. But there's a sector of ascending that's forever closed to me. And he said, furthermore, it's interesting to observe that you never tell us how this happened. He said, I don't know whether you cannot. I only know that you do not. This thought adjuster, like personality, has got the potential for all future time in it. This is a gas tank that's, to all practical intents and purposes, spiritually bottomless. I think the best definition of personality that's given in these papers is permanence in the presence of change. That appears in the last two lines of the first paragraph. And how can our personalities be unchanging when we change so? Well, let's look at it this way. Let's compare a human being to a necklace of beads. The beads are changing. Character changes. We grow, I hope, in knowledge, perhaps in wisdom. Certainly we profit by our errors. Our judgment improves. Our attitudes change. The beads are continually changing. But personality is the strand on which are strung these beads of worship, and wisdom, and character, and memory, and love, and emotion, and other things not so nice. If the strand changed, it wouldn't be us. There are two things that are never going to change if we fuse with our thought adjusters. One is the quality of divinity in the thought adjuster, and the other is our personality. The adjuster will change experientially as he experiences. Our soul will grow. The relationship between the surviving self, the soul, and the adjuster is an ever-changing thing. It's nothing but change. And if it stopped changing, this would be dead. But the personality is changeless, only expanding into new levels of function. But it's the same personality.
That is not what the psychologist
No.
use the word.
Psychology, we often use the word personality synonymous with sex appeal, or with friendliness, or extroversion. What's the difference? They're doing the personality what they've done to space. They've attached new meaning to it.
Well, on page 1223, there's a There are a bunch of whys. I wonder if you could answer them satisfactorily, please. It's the third paragraph, the adjuster's problem.
Yes. I'll tell you why we don't do this. We're animals. We're animals. We're lazy. We're inert. The papers point out that primitive man only thought when he was hungry. We require the stimulus of pain. Now, we do most of our thinking when we're hurt. Hunger isn't such a problem anymore, but primitive man went into action when he got hungry. His tummy hurt. He was uncomfortable. The same principle applies to so-called civilized man, or better still, man in process of civilization, which is what we are. When all goes well, we tend to become fat, dumb, and happy. Best symbolized. Consider a Cro-Magnon, beautiful specimen, intelligent, artistic. The guy paints on cave walls. It's been a rough hunting season. This guy is really down to red meat. He hasn't eaten for several days, and he's got a family. And he's picked up a spoor. Watch that guy. Every movement is poetry. He's totally mobilized. Every iota of his high intelligence is concentrated on the kill. Look at him perched on the branch of a tree. Got you to carve a statue of this character. Every muscle is etched there. His timing, you can see that keen intelligence figuring the motion of the animal, the arc of the spear. He draws back ever so silently. Wham! And it's a kill.
He could hypnotize them.
And now I want you to look at him 2 hours later. He's got blood on his mouth. His gut is distended. He's gorged himself. He's lying there, asleep under the tree. The flies are buzzing around his dirty face. Which would you pick to paint?
I liked him in that poise.
Of course.
Ready for the...
Of course. Why was he so mobilized? He had a problem. He hurt. And now do you perceive why they say in these papers that civilization is being forged out between the anvils of anguish and the hammers of suffering? Because this is the only time we get up off of our dead backsides and do something. We have to hurt. It takes this kind of a stimulus to cope with animals like us. And it takes this whiplash to cope with us until we catch fire. There are better stimuli, but until we respond to them, they ask these questions. Why don't you do something about this? Now, this is my feeling about these whys. We seem to alternate between Cro-Magnon, mobilized for the kill, and Cro-Magnon with his gut full. And while we all crave the full gut, the poetry is not there. The artistry is not there. The beauty is not there. And that's just as true of civilized man as it was of our more primitive ancestors. Because we aren't civilized. I don't know why this statement is true, but it is. It's certainly true in my experience. I spent so much of my life being a slob, and so little of my life being civilized. I'm a great disappointment to myself, as I'm sure you are to yourself. Sure. I think we all are terribly disappointed in ourselves. And that's why the psychological technique of rationalization is so vital. It helps us live with ourselves without actually hating ourselves. Some rationalization, I think, is indispensable as crutches to this particular level of being a tadpole, as long as there isn't too much of it.
Here's a childish question. Has you ever heard one? I read this book. I want to read it thoroughly. I want to read it all. But I want to live it. I don't want just the words to come in and know it intellectually. I want to live it. How? How do you start? Now that's very childish, but
It's a very good question. I think you, I think you, I can't speak for anyone but myself. This is too intimate. What in essence you ask me is, what is your religion? Not your theology or philosophy. I'm interested in getting as much help from my partner as I can. I feel rather diffident about discussing my problems with an infinite God, even though in my mind and heart I know He's got all the time in the world for me. But somehow it seems presumptuous. He's running a big universe. And it seems to me that there are so many other things that he could more profitably spend his time on. But I don't feel that way about this thought adjuster. Because this thought adjuster is God individuated for me. And I am his business. For this particular assignment, I am his principal concern. He may have some peripheral activities going on, but they're definitely secondary to me. Just as you are primary to the function of your thought adjuster. I have no hesitancy about discussing anything with this thought adjuster. I have a feeling of comradeship for him. And let me explain, I've never heard him say anything to him. If I ever did, it should probably scare me quite out of my wits, and I would immediately feel this is paranoia, you know. And I would put the whole thing on ice and think about it for quite a number of weeks and months until my human judgment could evaluate it, or until a little time passed. And yet I have never doubted that this is a dialogue. It's a dialogue between two conscious beings, one of whom is dead. I can talk, but I can't hear. And I don't let my deafness impair my faith in the least. I keep asking my partner for help in certain directions. How can I be more useful? How can we do a better job about coping with my ego, this belligerent self, that I'm not sure I've conquered at all? And if I were sure, then I'd be afraid of that concept too. I'd fear this was spiritual pride, you know, which goeth before a hell of a crash. I try to tell my partner about what life is like down here. There's a whole lot that he doesn't get out of this world because he doesn't have eyes, you know, doesn't have ears. He has a sensory mechanism, but it's quite different from mine. I know he's trying to tell me about paradise, so I tell him about this world, what it means to him. When we go to a new city, I try to let him see the city through my eyes. We talk about this. I probably spend more time talking to him in the privy than any other single place on earth, because there's the one place I'm sure to be alone. That's why I occasionally ride trains in a bedroom. One is alone. But that's not just because I love my thought adjuster. I happen to be a creature who needs periodic solitude. This is temperamental. I think if I'm going to be able to live more of this, he's got to help me. He's got to help me be less of a mammal and more human. To heck with being more spiritual. This is for the future. I'm content if I can just become less mammalian and more human. I'm not trying to be a frog. I can think about frogdom, but I'm a tadpole now. I'm not trying to get out on dry land. I wouldn't live. I've got to live in the water. I'll wake up on dry land. I asked my partner, how can I be of more service? Because in my religion, there's none of this. My religion is very, very simple. Somewhere at the center of all things is the boss. And these odd critters I bump into down here on earth are the boss's kids. And they should be treated accordingly. That's my religion. I can say it in 3 sentences. And my partner's interested in this because he comes from the boss. He understands that these are the boss's kids. And I'm sure he'll help me in every way he can. And no doubts about this. Now, the thing that dismays me is my own inconstancy. This mammalian inertia. Not that I do evil or sinful things, but I don't do enough. It's not that I dwell on sinful thoughts, but that I forget to deal with the boss and my partner. And yet, the book tells me that God can look on the inside of me and see that dismaying and dismal picture, which I know about, and he still loves me. And I consider the imperfections of the 12 apostles. And believe me, if you want to deal with their negatives, I made a speech on that subject last night. They're all a bunch of slobs. But they also had qualities, and Jesus loved them. And most of them played way over their heads. Just think, let's take inventory of the 12. Andrew, inexpressive. Had a hard time complimenting people. Peter, mercurial, undependable. John, big ego. Shone through in the fourth gospel, too. When he was old, senile. He was the apostle whom Jesus loved. James, no discretion. Got himself killed off early in the game because he just didn't realize what wasn't his business. Philip, no imagination. Nathaniel, a wisecracker. Matthew, guy with a kind of a lurid past. A publican, a tax squeezer. Simon Zelotes, a pig-headed patriot. Thomas, bad disposition. Wife delighted when he joined up so he'd be away from home. Judas, a well-educated prig. The Alpheus twins, stupid. Now, when I think about this, I get encouraged. Here were some real card-carrying members of the human race in good standing that the Creator's Son wasn't afraid to go into business with and to count not on these human, mammalian weaknesses and limitations, but on what could be accomplished when his Father's Spirit worked within these men and when he worked with them as a man among men. And you know, he had a pretty good batting average. He only struck out once. My ideals of what a man should be are growing geometrically. But at best, my progress is a limping arithmetic progression. And I'm in the sad fix of a guy who in a rowboat is diligently chasing a motorboat. Now, when I was about 15 or 17, I was running neck and neck with that motorboat. That was pretty hot stuff. When you're a young Marine, you've got it made. You've arrived. Ever since then, the gap has been widening between the rowboat and the motorboat. And I've considered, this is a real paradox, I've considered the alternate reactions. One is to torpedo the motorboat. This eases all tension at the cost of all progress, or at least at the cost of all ideals. Then I thought of stopping rowing. You know, you say, oh, the hell with it. You know, they said it was impossible, and so we said the hell with it. And I think the best course of action is the third course, which is to draw deeply on humor. I can look at the riverbank, and I believe I'm making progress upstream. And then I look at the motorboat, and the damn thing's farther away from me than it ever was. I think at this point, one should laugh. There are only two other alternatives, to cuss and to cry. And I think laughing is by far the best of the three.
And I'm on the bank still trying to hew out a log. I haven't gotten in the water yet.
Well, it's a stern chase, and you never make it. Here again, with ideals, Betty. Ideals are like stars. If you're going to navigate at night, I can think of nothing more useful than to have these stars. But a navigator would be a fool if he thought he could actually sail to them. The place for stars is in the skies, not in one's eyes.